Have I ever, or would I ever, perform a satire? Well, Dag the Eve agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School here. And you may also know me by my other works of fiction that I write, or my inspired works of fiction on Scaly Bug, the little storyteller, where I write and retell my experiences with my connection to divinity, in this case, the Dagda. And so I go by the term Dag the Bard because that's what I am. That's what I do. I function in the way of recalling the old stories about him and the two of the Danann and the old culture of Ireland, trying to explore that mythology, retell that mythology, but then also explore my own connection and my own spirituality through the narrative of those stories. And I'll be honest, when I was setting it all up, when I was doing it, okay, ever since I was a kid, I've always been writing stories. I always have had a fascination with story. The reason why I have glasses is because I strained my eyes by reading in poor light when I was not supposed to be reading as a kid and I was supposed to be asleep. Yes, I am the kid who would hide a torch in their bedroom under the pillows to keep reading the book when I was told I should have gone to sleep. Um, but I didn't just end with reading stories. I got into writing stories. I've always been a storyteller as a kid, so much so that even old school typewriters, like one finger punching, like, yeah, so many spelling mistakes because, yeah, I just was impassioned by telling the stories. So I've always been doing it. Absolutely always been doing it. And when I started to explore my relationship with my spirituality as a pagan, I did it through the medium that I knew best, which was story. And some of the first stories I wrote were about my exploration of my connection with the Dagda, what I knew about the Dagda, what I didn't know about the Dagda. And it turns out that I was writing stories which referred to things in the mythology that I had not yet learned. And that's when my brain took a flip and I got very fucking scared. Yes, scared. So at this point, I was writing stories. This was a decade ago, and my partner Laura encouraged me to share those stories, to set up a blog and just put them up there. And that's where the third string blog came from, where, the third string reference to the Dagdas harp, the three strains of music, because I'd begun to do some study at that particular point. But it came to defining who I was as a storyteller at that point, and I wasn't comfortable using Jon O'Sullivan, so I set up a pseudonym, which was Scaly Bug, little storyteller. He's on Dagda I'm on Scaly Bug. But then went a little bit further, and then referred to myself as the Dagda Bard because that was an easy way to put a subtitle on the blog. I think it was a WordPress blog I was setting up. And then I started to write the stories as the Dagda Bard. But I didn't really understand what a bard was. I just said the Dag the Bard because that's what came to my inspired moment when I was talking about him and my connection in the work with him. I wasn't declared a bard. I didn't go to bard college. I wasn't ratified by any druidic group or anything like that at all. No, I referred to myself as the Dag the Bard because the bard was the storyteller. And the more I have learned about it, the more I realized that maybe it wasn't just me making it for myself. Maybe it was somewhat inspired by the Dagda. But I'm also aware of the fact that that is personal gnosis. It's personal opinion, and I don't say or expect anyone else to adhere to or follow to that. It is just a way for people to understand the work that I do, because that's what a bard is. A bard is someone who serves their community through the form of memory and storytelling. The power of ancient Irish bards was recognized very clearly in not just the cultural context, but also in the legal context, in that we know from the legal tracts the structure of the ancient Irish tuath or tribe. Had to have a king, had to have a church, had to have a bard or a filler or a poet. Fillers being the upper echelons, the most skilled, the most talented of bards and poets. Versifiers is a wording from other cultural circumstances when we get into the whole bards, ovates, and druids. I did a class recently about being a druid, but before that, I did a class about being a bard because I needed to educate myself. I needed to go in and say, okay, well, where are the bards in Irish lore? What is the mythology? What are the abilities? What is the function of bard? If I'm going to refer to myself as an Irish bard, I need to do service to that and not just, oh, well, it's a fancy word and I want to use it. I need to understand the powers and the responsibilities that go along with that role and then live those values. And so that's where we come to the power of satire. Satire was a recognized ability for bards. Bards were said to have two forms of speech. They had two sides of the tongue, actually, it was referred to as, which, the biology of a bard is a uniquely interesting thing when it's talked about. Everyone talks about silver tongues or smooth tongues or honeyed words, all that kind of stuff. But a bard was literally said to have two sides to their tongue. There was a rough side and a gentle side. There were two forms of poetry that a bard would provide, and they were praise poetry and satire poetry. But the poetry wasn't just a case of I get to say fancy words. These were recognized forms of performance within the structures of the society. The reason why was because the praise poetry and the satire poetry could and did shift people's status within their community legitimately and legally. A person who had praise poetry put to their name and to their skill or to their talent would be recognized, would be kind of lauded for the performance that they can give in whatever skill or talent that they have, be it, battle or craft or poetry or medicine, whatever the actual service is. Someone who had praise poetry performed for them could elevate their status beyond just run of the mill within their tribe or their tua. They could even move to upper echelons or upper structured because the ancient Irish society was very structured. And so people generally were born within a certain caste in that society, and you wouldn't really move outside of that caste at all. You could move down if something went wrong or like, your tribe was conquered by another tribe, anything like that at all. But generally outside of warfares and stuff like that, people would be born in a particular caste and they'd live and die within that particular caste unless they were exemplary people. And those exemplary people could have their status changed. And so a bard or a poet who's quite skilled enough could be recognized as a filla. The filla wasn't just a run-of-the-mill performer in a tribe. They stood in the council. They stood in the authority. They moved into what was called the Ser Nemet or the upper echelon or the free Nemet. And that structure within ancient Irish society involved the king, the chief druid, and all of the noble caste. And so someone, because of their skill and their talent, could become a fella. Now, I am not a fucking fella. I know one person on the island of Ireland that I would consider a fella, and that is Geraldine Merkinsburn. We have the honor of hosting many of her classes here in the Irish Pagan School, and I would definitely recommend checking that out. Go to Irish Pagan School, look for Geraldine as a teacher, take those classes. Now, back to the satire side of it. So there was the praise poetry, and the praise poetry was about, lauding people and raising them and being like telling the praiseworthy narratives about that individual. And so satire is the opposite side of that. It's still a performance, it's still a notification, but it is everything that is bad about that person, everything that is unwholesome or unjust or inhospitable about that individual. And so the satire was recognized in that if someone had what was known as a legal satire placed against them, it would remove their status within their society. They could be stripped of their status within Suriname under the laws and removed. And everyone, including chieftains, were not above this law, which meant that people in the cast of Bard and Filla had a very unique status within society and power within society in that they had an ability that could remove power. And it wasn't just a case of removing power, it was removing someone's right to be within community. And that's where things get very, very dangerous. Because there was a particular act that could be performed by a fella where they would take someone by the earlobe and they would speak words at them, and that being witnessed by other people in the tribe would mean that they are cast out. They are no longer part of Tua, which in those days was a death sentence. If you are no longer part of your tribe, if you are cast out, you are no longer accepted within your Tua's lands, you are cast beyond them, you end up in some other tribal lands, and at that point you are a person of no people. And being a person of no people meant that you're not exactly a person anymore. in accordance with that legal status. And you could be taken as chattel, you could be taken as slavery or indentured servitude or anything work like that at all. So it was a serious, serious thing to put a satire against someone, to perform that level of thing. It wasn't just, oh, I'm gonna talk them down, or I'm gonna talk shit about them, or I'm gonna anything like that. A satire is very fucking serious, which is why satires themselves had to follow a very set structure, in that there was a legal structure that had to be performed with a satire. And we can see this from Ireland's mythological cycle, because when Brest, the failed king, was in rulership of Ireland after Nuada had his arm cut off, he favored his Fomorian ancestry over his Tuatha Danann people and caused the Tuatha Danann to fall under oppression. It was bad. It was really fucking bad. He pronounced false judgment against the Dagda for, a murder when it was actually a death by misadventure, because the Dagda was himself under pressure, or under threat of satire. Actually, it was a guy called Cregin Bale, a Fomorian bard, or lampooner as he was referred to as. Now I don't know if that particular term was to denigrate him in some way, shape, or form, but this Fomorian was living in the Dagda's home, and by threatening him every single day with a satire, he was taking from him the three best portions of his meal every day. And so the Dagda was working and laboring to build the security of Rathbresh, which would become Tara. But every day he'd come home and his three best portions of his meal would be taken under this threat of satire. Now, this is the goodly god of Druidry. This is the guy who has authority over sun, moon, land, sea. He's not going against this bard. He's not going against this threat of satire, because it's fucking serious. And so Angus, his son, comes to visit him and he's like, "Why are you sick?" Because the Dagda fell ill because of his effort he was putting out, but then not actually consuming the right volume of food to keep up the effort and energy he was expending. And so Angus is like, "Well, what's going on?" And Angus suggested that they put 3 gold coins in the best cuts of his Dagda's portion, and Cregin Bale would be then given those three best portions, because they were the best portions, because they included gold coins. They were the most valuable portions. But Cregin Bale had a tendency to scoff his food without being careful, or he would just consume it straight away. Cregin Bale actually translates as mouth in the belly. And so this Fomorian lampooner shoved all the three best portions of the food in his mouth and he choked to death. Now, is it intentional? Is it murder? Is it death by misadventure? We're not talking about, well, I'm happy to talk about that at another time. If anyone is interested, I will go into that in great detail. But it comes to Bress, and Bress sees a body count of a Fomorian bard, and straight away he's like, a Fomorian is dead in the Dagda's household. The Dagda's to the Danann, his bias comes into the fore, and he pronounces false judgment against the Dagda. He's warned. The Dagda's like, be careful, don't perform a princely judgment. It should be a kingly judgment. But he says that the Dagda straight up murdered Bress, and Dag then explains to him, no, he gobbled down. I don't know why he gobbled it down, but he swallowed 3 gold coins. And so they then cut open Gretchen Bale right there. 3 gold coins fall out. Dagda's vindicated for the effort. Like, why would he eat the 3 gold coins? That's actually what killed him. And then Bress is found to have given a false judgment, because a king's judgment had to be kingly for them to maintain their status within the society. But that still didn't end his kingship. The thing that ended the kingship of Bress was a satire. Later on, a Tuatha Danann bard comes to the house, comes to the hall of Tara, expecting to be treated fairly and honestly, because that's what hospitality was. You would bring someone in, they would get security and safety for a night, and they would be treated with food and drink as if they were family. Instead, Capra, because he was Tuatha Danann, was put off outside into a shed with a rough blanket, a couple of dry cakes, and not even milk, like water. And this is where we get the structure of the satire, because Capra the next day goes back to Bress and says, "Listen, you have given me no hospitality, and I warn you now, unless you make right for it, I will perform a satire against you." Bress completely ignores it, because, you're Tuatha Danann, like, fuck off with you, get out of it. And so he was given the warning. Capra then waited the necessary time for Bress to make up for it, to have remorse about what he had done, and to make right by the gift of hospitality. His obligation is to provide because he's a king. Bress doesn't do it. So then publicly, Capra performs the satire against Bress and refers and says to everybody that there is no hospitality in the House of Bress. By telling that story, by informing people, by like being the actual advocate and witness for what has actually happened in regards to the cultural circumstance, hospitality was fucking serious. And then everyone knew there was no hospitality in the House of Bress. They could take Capra's word for it because it was performed in the right way, it was done in the right way, and his speaking to a corruption or a misuse of power and status was just. And so the satire held, and then that is what finally topples Bress. Bress is then removed as king. He is then cast out of the Tuatha Danann. He then flees out of Ireland to the Fomorians, and all of this sets up the second invasion of the Fomorians for the Battle of Moytura, the Cach Moytura, the second battle at Moytura. So for all that Bress was an asshole, for all that Bress mistreated his people, for all that Bress put them under heavy taxation, for all that Bress oppressed like the heroes and the talented individuals of the Tuatha Danann, for all that he gave false judgment against someone, all of that was building up this narrative, but it was the satire that actually ended it. The power of the satire was to to function as a stopgap or a control to abuse of power, no matter your status. And so that's what happened. Bress was removed because of a satire. No, of course, because of everything else, but that was the linchpin. That was the final part. So satire is serious. It's legit serious. And that's why it comes back around to, have I ever performed a satire in that function as a bard? No, I've not. I've expressed my opinions as a personal person. I have had many a rant against, like, abuses of power or corruptions or difficulties and abuses, against, like, toxic masculinity, against the, like, patriarchal structures of our world, against violence and violence against women, like all of these kind of things. I have had rants about. I have had expressions and stories about. I have told of my personal experiences in all of these ways. But does that make it a satire? No. And the difference is, yes, I'm a bard, okay, but just because I'm a bard and I say it, that doesn't mean it's a satire. A satire has to conform to that structure. The person who is to be satirized needs to be notified about what they have done, how that has violated the cultural norm, how it has gone against the expectations, how it has gone against the rules of hospitality or rules of society and community. And once that person is notified, it is down on them. They're given a period of time where they have to make right by it. They either, sit down, apologize for what they've done, take on the learning, come back and adjust their behavior in some way, shape, or form to show that they have realized the error that they have made. But if they don't, if they double down, if they come back against it all over again, then at that point they're notified that a satire could be placed. I have never had to get that far. And being very candid, folks, I'm afraid of that. I am aware that there is a following in our world who come to the Irish Pagan School. I'm honored by the opinions of people coming to our education and finding that it is some of the best out there, if not the best. Like, we have reviews from people on our websites, in our communities, even people who have stepped away from our community and have come back to us once they have resolved personal feelings and personal difficulties around things. They say that there's no other teaching out there that compares. And so I'm honored by that. I really, really am. But that does mean I have an obligation. I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm using my correct words. I'm not out here banging drums trying to stir up people to follow my word and my one way. How many times have you heard me say there is no one true way? It is about you exploring your spiritual growth for yourself. It's about you building a right relationship for yourself with you and divinity, not through me. I don't stand between you and your explorations of spirituality. I'm a guidepost standing at the side saying, maybe go this way and don't go that way. Or here's some resources that could help you. Or here's like, have you ever read this story that might assist you? That's what I'm here for. I am not the mouthpiece of any god. I've had my own personal experiences with speaking for the Dagda in the past, but I'm always clear where that happens. And I don't choose to do it. I don't pursue that because, again, it scares me. So, have I ever performed a satire? No, I've not. Could I? Pretty sure I could. Would I? I've come close. But the difference with that is I would not satire a particular individual over a personal matter because the function of satire is to be a calling out of misuse of power. We have a housing crisis in our country. All of that is brought about by a misuse of power. I talk about that. I did a video recently about how I'm afraid for our world. And the fear that I have is about people not treating other people like community and treating them like enemies or adversaries. And how that divisiveness is just built by the power structures and those in power at the moment so that they can maintain their power and their wealth and their status within a very crippled fucking world. Have I performed a satire against them? Not yet, but I have considered it. I will honest. I made it to a first draft about a particular political party here in Ireland, but I wouldn't take down an individual. I wouldn't cast a person out of like their status as an Irish person. I can't do that. That's not in my ability to do. But if I were to perform a satire against Taoiseach, Tánaiste, like Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, whomever it is who is in power and abusing power, the first thing I do is send them a letter, send them a notification, see if there's going to be any justification, see if there's going to be a way to negotiate through that or talk through that before it goes to an open performance of satire. Because for me to do it ethically, for me to do it right, it would have to be that. I'd have to privately communicate with the person, tell them about their indiscretions, what they have done, or the community or the group or the power, the people in power, and see if they're willing to make a restitution or see if they're willing to resolve the matter. And only when that is not addressed and not taken care of, at that point would the satire happen. But a satire can't be done in private. A satire has to be performed publicly. It would have to be it was a public affair to stand out in front of everyone within a tribe, within a community, and call out the power and give the justification. So, no, I've never satirized someone or a community or a group at the moment. And I will always try and communicate first to try and resolve that without the need for satire because I believe in that power of words. So, yeah, I rant. Absolutely. I express my opinions. Absolutely. I get upset and worried and hurt and angry. Absolutely. The same as anyone else. But before I come here and sit in front of a microphone and talk into a camera like this, I process my own shit first. Because when I use my words, even in this capacity, I use them very carefully because I always want to be using my energy and using my power of conversation to take down the problem, to take down the behavior, to speak against the narratives or the entitlements or anything like that at all, because that's the problem. And it might be a case that the person who has generated an anger or a hurt for me in some way, shape, or form, I end up pitying them most times more often because I see that they are a product of their status, of their circumstance, of how they've been raised, of what they've been educated in. It is a problem that of behavior, not of nature. And so always given an opportunity, people generally figure their stuff out and generally go to decide to educate themselves and grow beyond it. And that's exactly what I'm here for, to provide education, to teach people a perspective that allows them to grow. The other side of a satire is if you perform an unjust or an illegal satire, it will blemish you. It will rebound against you and it will damage you. So people speaking out of turn, people misusing the power of satire, invariably find that it comes back on them. It boomerangs back on them and it damages them because it doesn't find its intended target, because the intended target has done nothing worthy of that satire. So it's always worth being aware of the consequences. It's always worth being aware of the impact as much as the intent. And so I'm very hyper aware of my impact and my intent because I always want to make sure that when I'm speaking from a what I perceive as a righteous position, that my anger is used in a not just a right way, but in a righteous way. So that I'm calling out bad behaviors, I'm calling about the difficulties or damages that affect all of us, because that's the only ethical way that I can approach these narratives and dialogues. So hopefully that answers that question. I as yet have always found some other way of conversing through a thing, negotiating through a thing, talking through a thing, educating people through a thing before it gets to the point of me calling it out or calling it down. I've had personal experiences. I have been the victim of like a couple of different terrible things, even in the last few years, even in pagan circles, but I haven't gone after those individuals. Like I was at a conference and someone made a very sexually inappropriate remark to me just because I was wearing a Dagda t-shirt. I've expressed that I laughed it off uncomfortably. It was only when I walked away and I told that story to people around me, to people I was at the convention with, that they were like, that was not appropriate at all. And I was like, no, they were just making a joke because, Dagda t-shirt and, euphemisms, Dagda stuff. And they're like, okay, well, flip the narrative. What if they were a male presenting person and you were a young female? And they started making comments based on bodily autonomy at that point. At which point I was like, well, oh shit. I let the convention know. I let them know that there was a problem with this particular individual. I didn't go around and start slating that person all over the place. Even now, I'm not saying their name because the behavior is the problem. The misinformation is the problem. And so I'll use my voice. I'll use my words. I'll use the education that I gain from all of this study in order to speak against the behaviors and encourage people to just do fucking better. And if you don't know what better looks like, figure it out. And when you do figure it out, just do better. Maya Angelou, one of our favorite quotes here in our community. Do the best you can. And when you know better, just do better. So thank you very much for this rant. Again, it's an interesting one, and it's something that I have seen misused. I have seen people claiming to be bards, claiming to be villa, and choosing to engage in those practices for themselves. And it's like, okay, but you're speaking for yourself. Are you speaking for your community? I've seen it done wrong, from my opinion, from my perspective, and I've seen the harm that it can do. So that's why I wanted to make this video. Not to call out anyone, not to take anyone down, not to, it's the behavior. Because harm can happen when this ability of words is not used in the right way. Damage does follow when satire is performed unjustly or inappropriately or illegally. It's not just about intent. You also have to consider impact. Because when we use our words, we're responsible for not just our intent, but also the impact. And that is something that not many people, oh, well, I didn't mean it. Oh, well, good intentions. Anyway, thank you very much for the query and the question. I have not performed a legal satire, and if I were ever to perform a legal satire, it would be done very fucking publicly. So it would probably be done here and shared everywhere. After the whatever power structure involved has been given an opportunity to make it right and not done so. So with that, thank you very much for joining us for the conversation. If you'd like to know more, check out the Irish Pagan School. There's a class on literally a class on being a bard there. I also did a class on what is a druid quite recently, which touches on some of these circumstances and what actually roles or functions these people are fulfill within their community and within their tribe. If you want to pick up something for free, go to irishpagan.school/free, and you've got a year's worth of free resources available. Book recommendations, audio recordings, free classes, all of it is there. Until next time, look after yourself, take care, and salon. Goodbye.